At its peak in 1958, the Cushman Motor Works in Lincoln, Nebraska, produced 15,000 scooters in a single year from a factory that had survived the Depression, armed the war, and called itself the #1 maker of light vehicles in America. 7 years later, nobody would sign the memo that killed the line. The parking lots of the University of Nebraska now occupy most of what was once 15 acres of factory floor, foundry, machine shop, and assembly line at 21st and Y Streets. The building, constructed in 1913, photographed in 1919, with its brick facade and the confidence of a Midwestern manufacturer who expected to be there for a century, was razed piece by piece through the late 1990s and early 2000s. The last structures cleared when Textron moved the remaining Cushman operations to Augusta, Georgia in 2002. Today, a student rushing to an 8 a.m. class crosses what was once the assembly line. There is no marker. The machine they built here made a specific sound, not a roar. Nothing about a single flathead cylinder at 3,500 revolutions per minute produces a roar, but a sustained mechanical conversation. A rhythmic beat audible 3 blocks away and identifiable at once to anyone who had owned one or wanted to. That sound was the Husky engine. It was the same engine in 1922 and in 1965. That was both the company's greatest achievement and the reason it could not adapt when the world moved. Then, the Outboard Marine Corporation purchase in 1957, which brought marine engine instincts to a vehicle company. The OMC M9 engine of 1,961, which vibrated so badly Cushman was briefly forced to revert to the old design while Honda opened its 500th American dealership. The Vespa, 170 pounds to Cushman's 275, arriving from Italy with enclosed bodywork and European styling. The Honda Super Cub, which went from 170 units sold in America in 1959 to more than 100,000 inches, 1,963. And finally, Sales Bulletin SB71, dated the 25th of February 1966. No signature, because in a company where every internal communication carried a name, nobody wanted their name on this one. This is the story of how earned pride became fatal rigidity, how a company that built exactly the right machine for every moment it lived through could not build a different machine when the moment demanded one. Not one failure, a 60-year accumulation of decisions that each seemed correct in its own time, and together produced a machine the world outgrew. 2 cousins and a basement on O Street. The history handed down by company literature describes Everett and Clinton Cushman as cousins who began building 2-cycle gasoline engines in a basement workshop around 1901 or 1903. The precise date depends on the source. What is certain is that by 1913, when they formally incorporated as Cushman Motor Works and began construction of the factory at 21st and X Streets, they had moved to a facility that would eventually cover 250,000 square feet on 15 acres of Lincoln real estate. The Cushman family had come from Wisconsin to Lincoln in the late 1890s, part of the internal migration that populated Nebraska's cities with the children of farmers looking for something other than farming. Everett, the elder, was working as a machinist for the Claiborne L. Shader Bicycle Shop in Lincoln by 1901. The work of a man who understood metal tolerances not from textbooks, but from handling components every day, learning where they failed and why. Clinton had graduated from the University of Nebraska with an engineering degree. This was a family that moved toward machines. They were not wealthy. They were not industrialists by birth or by capital. They were Midwestern farm-adjacent people with the mechanical aptitude that comes from a culture in which things that break must be fixed because the nearest replacement is a week away. That philosophy, things that break must be fixed, And "things must be built not to break" was not a marketing slogan for Cushman. It was the company's operating system, from the first engine cast in the basement on O Street to the last scooter rolled off the line in 1965. They named their engine the Husky. Not for speed or elegance, the name conveyed durability and practical reliability. A Husky did not win competitions. A Husky came back every day. The engine powered cream separators, water pumps, washing machines, wood saws, and agricultural machinery. And in every application, its primary virtue was the same. It worked. And it kept working. And when it did not work, you could fix it with basic tools. That was the Cushman DNA from 1901 forward, not a liability until the world decided it wanted a machine that looked like it was made for a life you wished you. During the First World War, Cushman received military contracts for 2 and 4 horsepower engines, giving the company its first experience with institutional buyers who needed consistency above all else. Both Everett and Clinton had severed their connection to the business by the late 1920s. The farm depression of the early 1920s hit Cushman's primary market hard. By 1934, when John F. Ammon and his son Charles completed the acquisition that merged Easy Manufacturing Company with Cushman Motor Works, the founding family was gone, and the company was held together by the quality of the engine it had spent 12 years refining. The boy on the bicycle and the decision that followed. The story told at the Lane Motor Museum in Nashville, drawing from company history, is specific and human in the way that origin stories rarely are. In 1936, a boy rode into the Cushman Motor Works plant on a bicycle fitted with a washing machine motor adapted from Cushman's own Husky engine catalog. He was looking for parts. Charles Ammon, who had taken over as the company's top executive after his father's acquisition of Cushman from its founding original ownership, saw the boy ride in. He saw the bicycle. He saw the motor. He was not a romantic. He was a businessman who had been watching the Depression compress every market simultaneously for 6 years, looking for any opening that the existing manufacturing capability could serve without requiring capital he did not have. A scooter required no new tooling investment. It would use the Husky engines that were stacking up in inventory because the industrial market was buying fewer of them. He set his sons, Robert and William, to work on the design. They had 60 days. The result, introduced in 1936, was the Auto Glide, a step-through frame of welded steel, the Husky engine mounted low and exposed, a single-speed transmission with a centrifugal clutch, a single rear brake, no lighting, no instrumentation. It weighed about 200 pounds. It cost approximately $90 at introduction. Roughly 3 weeks of wages for an employed industrial worker in Depression America. A Ford Tudor sedan cost $510. A Harley-Davidson 45 flathead cost $355. The Auto Glide cost $90. And the penny a mile operating cost that Cushman advertised was not marketing fiction. At 75 miles per gallon and Depression-era fuel prices of 8 to 10 cents per gallon, a man commuting 6 miles each way to work spent approximately $3 on fuel annually. The step-through design made the machine accessible to women and to men in work clothing rather than riding gear. The market for a $90 transportation scooter was not the market for a $355 Harley-Davidson. It was the market for people who would never call themselves motorcyclists, farmers who needed to check the back 40, women whose husbands had taken the family car to a job 30 miles away, teenagers who had saved enough for a kit and a Saturday afternoon. They were the people Cushman understood completely, and for 20 years, understanding them was enough. Sales were immediate and sufficient. The scooter moved Husky engines and moved Cushman from the narrow market of industrial engine sales into personal transportation, a market that proved larger and more resilient than anything the cream separator business had ever offered. The Husky at full song. The Husky engine deserves its own chapter, because without it there is no Cushman story worth telling. It is the one constant in a narrative full of ownership changes, product pivots, and external pressures. A single-cylinder, air-cooled, four-stroke engine that Cushman introduced in 1922 and refined continuously through the final production in 1965, and which was, at every stage of its development, exactly what it needed to be: reliable, maintainable, adequate. Not magnificent, not powerful, but adequate consistently delivered a standard that elegant intermittently delivered does not meet. The Husky displaced 8.45 cubic inches in its original form and grew to 318 cubic centimeters, 19.4 cubic inches, in the Eagle configuration. It was a flathead engine. In an overhead valve engine, the valves open from above, allowing the combustion chamber to be shaped so the fire reaches every corner cleanly. In a flathead, the valves open from the sides, simpler to build, simpler to maintain, but less efficient. Every major manufacturer by the late 1940s was moving away from flatheads. Harley-Davidson had shifted its top models to overhead valves. The European manufacturers never built flathead scooters at all. The Husky's architecture, born in 1922, was never fundamentally redesigned. That decision was made silently, never officially announced, by a company that could not imagine building something different because the thing it built was working. The engine sat in the frame with its cooling fins exposed to the air, visible and working, not hidden behind panels. The fins collected road dust and required periodic cleaning. On cold Nebraska mornings, they took several minutes to warm. These were the known facts of Husky ownership, accepted as the character of a machine that was always honest about its nature. At 3,500 revolutions per minute, the Husky made its specific sound, a mechanical beat rather than a hum, a rhythmic conversation between one cylinder and the air, present and recognizable but not aggressive. The sound of something working within its capability rather than at the edge of it. This was both the Husky's commercial appeal and its eventual competitive limitation. A machine that sounds like it is working within its capability sounds, to a buyer in 1958 with a Honda in front of him, like a machine that is old. Thomas Bracco of Springfield, Illinois, purchased a Cushman in 1945, the specific machine now held by the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History in Washington. He was a teenager and rode it to high school, to social activities, and to the locomotive roundhouse of the Chicago and Illinois Midland Railroad, where he worked as a hostler. When he donated it to the Smithsonian, he donated the physical evidence of what the Cushman meant to its generation. Transportation that cost almost nothing to operate, that worked without drama, that asked only that you understand the throttle twisted the wrong way. That throttle twisting forward to accelerate, opposite every other machine on the market, was a quirk Cushman never corrected, and that every veteran rider mentioned as the first thing you had to unlearn when you climbed on, and the first thing you missed when you climbed off. A Cushman rider could get on no other machine and feel immediately at home. The quirk had become identity. Identity had become loyalty. Loyalty, over enough years, becomes the specific kind of pride that makes adaptation painful. 40 miles per hour over Normandy. In 1942, the United States Army began organizing the airborne units that would execute parachute assaults from North Africa through the Rhine crossing. A paratrooper jumping into enemy territory in 1944 carried what he could jump with: his rifle, a combat knife, rations, ammunition loaded across his body, and whatever communications equipment his unit demanded. He landed wherever the wind took him, in darkness, in enemy-held territory, with no supply line behind him and no mechanical support available. He fought until the ground forces arrived, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. They needed something that could move faster than a man-on-foot communications, reconnaissance, mobility between scattered landing zones. The Army needed a scooter small enough to fit in a CG-4 Waco glider, light enough to be dropped by parachute from a C-46 or C-47, simple enough to be maintained by a combat soldier who was not a mechanic, and reliable enough to survive the drop itself and then start and run when the paratrooper who needed it reached it in a French field at 2 in the morning. Cushman received the contract. The engineering team at 21st and Y, supplemented by women hired at 43 cents per hour for jobs that men had done for 53 cents. The men were in uniform, designed the Model 53, designated by the Army as the G-683 Airborne Infantry Scooter. The specifications were brutally practical: a 242 cubic centimeter Husky engine producing 4.6 horsepower, a 2-speed gearbox, a kickstarter, pneumatic tires, the same size as aircraft tires, so they could be interchanged from aircraft stocks in the field. Total weight, 255 pounds. Top speed, 40 miles per hour. Range, 100 miles on a tank of just over 1 gallon. The ability to ford 12 inches of water, climb a 2.5% grade, and tow the M3A4 utility cart fitted with a .30 caliber machine gun or an 8.1 millimeter mortar. The Army ordered 4,734 of them. Production ran from 1,944 through 1,945. A photograph from that year shows a line of Model 53s being prepared for loading at an airfield. The machines are painted olive drab. Several women in factory clothing stand in the foreground. They are smiling. They do not know they are in a photograph that will be studied 80 years later. They are going to work. What the surviving records do not always say clearly. Cushman's most significant wartime contribution was not the scooter. It was the bomb fuses and precision airline engine components. While 4,734 airborne scooters moved paratroopers around European battlefields, the women, at 43 cents per hour, were machining the interior mechanisms of weapons, precision work at tolerances the scooter's Husky engine did not require. Between 1,942 and 1,945, Cushman received 4 Army contracts and a separate Navy contract worth more than $1.7 million. The scooters accounted for a fraction of that revenue. The specification plate affixed below each Model 53's seat reads, Cushman Auto Glide, Model 53, Husky Engine Model, 16M71, HP4, ING, 4 horsepower, 1 engine. Everything else the operator needed could be learned in 20 minutes. Photographs from outside Bastogne in December 1944 show the machines being ridden through frozen Belgian roads, the Husky engines running in temperatures that killed German tank engines. The scooter was not the reason the Battle of the Bulge turned, but it was there. When the war ended, the surplus Model 53s not yet deployed were designated as the Model 53A and sold to the civilian market. They sold reasonably, but the real post-war market was not for military surplus. It was for something that looked like the future, not the past. The Eagle lands. In 1949, Cushman introduced the Eagle. The decision behind it was Charles Ammon's clearest strategic insight. The post-war economy was not the Depression economy. The boys who had gone to war had come back to prosperity. They wanted machines that looked like machines, not machines that looked like necessities. The Eagle's answer: take the Husky engine and give it a body that a teenage boy would want to be seen on. The step-through frame was gone. In its place, a tubular steel frame with the fuel tank mounted high and forward, contoured fenders, a sprung saddle, wide handlebars with chrome trim. The colors black, maroon, cream came from the Harley-Davidson and Indian color catalogs. The Eagle did not look like a necessity. It looked like a want. The Husky M8 engine displaced 318 cubic centimeters and produced between 7 and 8 horsepower. Belt-driven through a 2-speed transmission with a foot clutch and a hand-shift lever on the left side of the tank. Maximum speed, 50 miles per hour. Fuel economy, 75 miles per gallon. Weight, approximately 275 pounds. In most American states, a 14-year-old could legally ride one. The licensing age for scooters was lower than for motorcycles. The Eagle was an instant success. Cushman struggled to keep up with demand through 1950 and 1951, the factory running at capacity and still falling behind. The throttle still twisted forward. Every Eagle rider learned that on the first ride, usually with a startled surge of the engine when the rider's instinct was to slow it down. And then they learned it so thoroughly that any other machine felt foreign. A Cushman rider could not get on any other machine on Earth and feel immediately at home. The Eagle had taken the Husky's functional honesty and given it a personality, and the personality stuck. In Glendale in 1953, a commuter on his Eagle on the Harbor Freeway rode the same route every morning from the San Fernando Valley to El Segundo, past the spot where a Hells Angels chapter gathered at the on-ramp, watching traffic. They watched him pass every morning. One of them, eventually, gave him a nod. That was the Eagle's cultural position. Not a rival, not a threat, not a joke. Just a machine that worked, without requiring the rider to be anything other than someone who needed to get somewhere. The Sears connection expanded the Eagle's reach to every county. Under the Allstate brand name, Sears sold Cushman-built scooters through its mail-order catalog, the most effective distribution network in the American economy of the 1950s. A teenager in rural Mississippi who could not reach a Cushman dealer could order the Sears Allstate Deluxe Model 811.4 from the catalog, assembled to identical Eagle specifications, available for pickup at the local Sears store. The model was introduced in 1951 and discontinued in 1957. At the peak, Cushman and Sears together were moving scooters through a network that reached every American household with a catalog subscription. America's Scooter. 15,000 scooters in 1958. That number appears in every history of the company, in the Lincoln Journal-Star archives, in the Smithsonian's records. It is the number that represents Cushman at its fullest. 15,000 machines, hundreds of workers, a 250,000 square foot factory on 15 acres, operating near capacity. A product line running from the economy Highlander through the Eagle and Silver Eagle to the truckster utility vehicle. President Eisenhower rode a Cushman Gulfster at Augusta National. No payment was made when Life magazine ran photographs of Eisenhower on the course with the scooter in frame. The advertisement was free. The Shriners adopted the Eagle for their motorized parade units, precision formations in ceremonial dress, the flathead Huskies thumping in unison as the formations turned and the crowds cheered. The Cushman factory made a special Silver Eagle just for the Shriners, with engraving on the fender and a custom paint scheme. It is among the rarest Cushmans in existence today. Dan Hedgeland started as a truck loader at the Lincoln plant in the early 1950s and worked his way into management over 35 years. "You knew everybody," he said in an oral history collected by the Nebraska State Historical Society. "When something went wrong on the line, you didn't need a supervisor to tell you the guy next to you already knew, and he was already fixing it." The United Auto Workers had organized the plant. The union contract set wages and conditions, but inside those parameters, the Cushman factory operated on loyalty as a shared interest, not a policy. The people who built the Eagles also rode them. When a rider complained to a dealer that the carburetor was flooding cold, the information reached the assembly line floor the following week. The Lincoln Journal-Star, covering the plant in 1959, noted that Cushman Motor Works had become the #1 maker of light vehicles in America. Charles Ammon, having run the merged company for 25 years, could read that sentence and see the validation of everything he had built, from a Depression-era engine company and a boy on a converted bicycle. He was right about what it validated. He was wrong about what it meant for the future. That same year, Kihachiro Kawashima, arrived in Los Angeles. The Italian question and the Japanese answer. Corradino d'Ascanio had never liked motorcycles. He was an aeronautical engineer, the man who designed a functioning helicopter prototype in Italy in 1930, and he found motorcycles dirty and badly organized. When Piaggio assigned him to design a scooter in 1946, he approached it without any institutional investment in how scooters had always been made. The irony, the best scooter yet built was designed by a man who disliked what he was designing. The Vespa he produced was an enclosure, pressed steel monocoque body, engine mounted inside and to the side of the rear wheel, clean surfaces that required nothing mechanical of the rider because everything mechanical was covered. A man could ride a Vespa in a business suit and arrive without oil on his trousers. The Vespa weighed 170 pounds. The Cushman Eagle weighed 275 pounds. The Vespa's 125 cubic centimeter engine achieved 70 miles per gallon at 40% of the Cushman's weight. The Vespa cost $395 in American showrooms by the mid-1950s versus the Eagle's $485. The Lambretta offered similar specifications at a similar price. What the Italian machines introduced to American buyers was not a better machine. The Husky engine was more reliable than either Italian engine in sustained use. What they introduced was a different argument. Riding a Vespa in 1956 said European sophistication. It said that the machine's owner cared about aesthetics, not just function. Riding a Cushman Eagle said honest, functional, American, Midwestern, connected to a world of cream separators and Depression-era necessity. That world was real. It was also over. Cushman's response was the Road King and Pacemaker models, introduced in the late 1950s with what the company called jet age body styling. Fiberglass panels enclosed more of the mechanical assembly. The visual silhouette moved closer to the Italian machines. The styling could not conceal that the engine underneath was the same Husky that had been powering Cushman machines since 1922. The body changed. The machine did not. Now, the Japanese. In October 1958, the same year, Cushman produced its record 15,000 scooters. Kihachiro Kawashima stepped off a plane in Los Angeles with 8 employees and $250,000 in capital. He was 33 years old. Honda's American venture had been funded in part by Soichiro, Honda's wife's jewelry, and a letter of credit from a Japanese bank. They set up an office at 4077 Pico Boulevard. The Honda Super Cub was designed for post-war Japan, a country rebuilding from rubble with a population that needed reliable transportation and had neither the roads nor the money for automobiles. It became the answer to an American problem because the problem was identical: reliable mobility at a price most people could afford. The numbers tell the story without commentary. 1,959. Honda sold 170 units in America. Cushman produced 15,000 scooters. 1,963. Honda sold more than 100,000 units in America. Cushman's production had been falling for 3 straight years. The lines crossed somewhere between those 2 years, and nobody at 21st and Y Street saw it happen. The Cub weighed 154 pounds. The Eagle weighed 275 pounds. The Cub's engine was enclosed behind pressed steel bodywork. The Husky was exposed to air and road. The Cub had an automatic transmission, twist the throttle and go. The Cushman's 2-speed handshift required learning a sequence that no other vehicle on the road replicated. The Cub cost $250. The Eagle cost $485. The Cub got 200 miles to the gallon. The Eagle got 75. Honda's American advertising campaign, developed in 1962 and 1963 by Gray Advertising, did not run in motorcycle magazines. It ran in Life, Time, Look, and the Saturday Evening Post, showing young professionals, families, college students, people who would never call themselves motorcyclists. The slogan, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda." It erased the Marlon Brando image, the outlaw, the threat, and replaced it with a neighbor, someone's son who had bought a sensible machine for a sensible reason. The Beach Boys recorded Little Honda in 1964. No payment was made. That was cultural endorsement that no advertising budget could have purchased. This was the argument the Cushman Motor Works could not make with the Eagle. The Eagle was honest about what it was. Honesty, in 1962, was no longer the primary virtue a scooter buyer was seeking. The iron refused to bend. In 1961, the Outboard Marine Corporation introduced the OMC M9 engine into the Super Silver Eagle, 9 horsepower, overhead valves, 354 cubic centimeters. More modern than the Husky, by every technical measure. It also vibrated. The M9's balance characteristics, derived from outboard motor application, produced in motorcycle use, a resonance that riders felt as a persistent buzz through the handlebars above 35 miles per hour. Not dangerous, relentless. Cushman briefly reverted to the cast-iron Husky for 1,961 and 1,962, while OMC engineers worked on the balance problem. They reduced the vibration. They did not eliminate it. The timing was catastrophic. The year the M9 launched was the year Honda was opening its 500th American dealership. The structural problems went deeper than the engine. Eagle specifications in 1,960 10-inch wheels when Honda ran 17-inch tires. A 2-speed hand-shift transmission when competitors offered 3 and 4 speeds with automatic clutching. A flathead valve architecture from 1,922. The reverse throttle that every Cushman rider knew by reflex, and that made every Cushman rider a passenger on any other machine until they spent 20 minutes unlearning it. Each of these features had been correct when it was chosen. Together, in 1962, they described a machine designed for a world that no longer existed. The cast-iron Husky's greatest virtue was its indestructibility, parts for a 1,936. Autoglide would fit a 1,950. October 1961. Pacemaker and Road King begin appearing at clearance prices, the unmistakable sign of a model whose run is ending without announcement. March 1962. Both discontinued. April 1964. The Highlander and the standard cast-iron Eagle discontinued. March 1965. The last cast-iron engine scooter comes off the line. The Super Silver Eagle continues into the fall of 1965, and a few hundred remaining units are sold as 1,966 models. The 25th of February 1966. Sales Bulletin SB71. No signature. In a company where every internal communication carried a name, nobody wanted their name on this one. The bulletin informed Cushman dealers that scooter production had ended. The blank line at the bottom where a name should have been is its own testimony. On the assembly line, the workers had known before the memo. Bob Jungluth later described the final months. You could see it in the parking lot. People started taking 2 cars to work because they didn't know if there'd be a shift to bring them home together. The assembly line photograph from 1960, published in the Lincoln Journal-Star, shows workers at their stations moving scooters down a busy, organized line. The faces are professional and focused. Nothing in the photograph suggests this line would be shut down within 5 years. That is the nature of industrial decline. It does not look like decline until it becomes undeniable. 7 cents a pound in what they saved. Bob Jungluth drove from Omaha to Lincoln twice a week in the months after the scooter line ended 100 miles round trip on his own time to buy parts from the surplus that Cushman was liquidating by weight. cast iron engine blocks stamped put in permanent storage, 1,963, were being sold for 7 cents a pound. Jungluth had $350 saved the money he and his wife had set aside to replace their washing machine. He spent it on 3,500 pistons. The arithmetic was exact. If those pistons were melted down, the Eagles sitting in garages across the country would eventually become machines that could not be restored. He drove home with 3,500 pistons in the trunk and told his wife the washing machine would have to wait. He was not alone, but he was early. George Hammets, who had worked in Cushman's parts department, retained access to inventory beyond what the official liquidation sold, acting against institutional pressure to clear the shelves and move on. Peg McClure fought to preserve factory tooling that would otherwise have been scrapped, the dies and jigs that had made the parts, which were as important as the parts themselves, because without them, certain components could never be reproduced again. Without Jungluth and Hammets and McClure, restored Eagles today would be curiosities beautiful to look at, impossible to run. With them, a culture survived. The Cushman Club of America has more than 2,300 member families. The 2023 national meet at the Adams County Fairgrounds in Hastings, Nebraska, drew 293 registered families and an attendee from Australia. Dick DeBuse of Omaha returned from Vietnam in 1970 to find scooter production had ceased. Dennis Cornelson of York, Nebraska. I had one when I was in high school. I got rid of it when I got interested in girls and cars. He has several now. A barrel spring Eagle in verifiable original condition brings between $8,000 and $12,000 at current auction. A Model 53 Airborne brought $7,000 at a 2013 military charity auction. The Lane Motor Museum in Nashville holds a 1,957 standard cast iron Eagle, described as a scooter wanting to be a big motorcycle. Ransoms of Great Britain acquired Cushman from OMC in 1989. Textron acquired Ransoms in 1998 and moved the remaining operations to Augusta, Georgia in 2002. The truckster continued until 2002, exactly 50 years from its introduction. And in Lincoln today, Kawasaki Motors Manufacturing employs approximately 2,400 workers building motorcycles and utility vehicles for the American market. The company whose products helped open the American market to Japanese manufacturers now provides the industrial employment that Cushman once provided in the same city. The circle closed so perfectly it barely qualifies as metaphor. Return to 21st and Y. The parking lot is the honest monument. A factory that made things has been replaced by a space that serves movement cars arriving, parking, departing, which is, in its way, continuous with what the factory did. Cushman made machines that moved people. The parking lot holds machines that move people. The specific machines are different. The purpose is not. The pride that Charles Ammon and his sons Robert and William built into the Cushman operation was real and earned. They took a failing engine company in Depression-era Nebraska and built it into the #1 maker of light vehicles in America through decisions that each made complete sense within the framework of what the company already was. The Autoglide served the Depression. The Airborne served the war. The Eagle served the post-war prosperity. Each one was exactly right for its moment. The moment moved. The Vespa moved with it. Honda moved with it faster and more completely. The Cushman Motor Works moved to golf carts. This is not a criticism. It is the arithmetic of a company that knew what it was and could not become something else in time. The cast iron that would not wear out also would not change. The throttle that twisted the wrong way taught loyalty and made adaptation painful. The earned pride of building something that worked, year after year, became the thing that made it impossible to imagine building something different. You do not fault an honest man for failing to be fashionable, but you note, with something like sadness, that the world does not wait. Stand in the parking lot at 21st and Y on a Tuesday in September. The Nebraska sky is the blue of Great Plains, autumn high and clear and too big to look at directly. Students move between buildings. The engine is not running here. The machines that Cushman made are scattered across the continent in garages and museums and storage buildings, maintained by people who learned to ride on them or who found them decades later and recognized something they could not fully name. Somewhere outside Hastings or York or Lincoln, someone who has just finished a careful restoration kicks the starter and listens for the catch. The throttle twists forward.